all the time in our two jobs, and I am so delighted to have her here. I can't think of anybody that Montana is so blessed to have as their chief economist, Barbara.
Thanks, Mary. Just so you know, Mary is the president of my fan club, so you really should not believe anything she says about you. She's a little biased. But so today, every year, the Montana Department of Labor publishes a Labor Day report, which kind of reviews the Montana economy overall and kind of presents a lot of different economic information, mostly labor information. So I was going to bring everybody a copy, but I would have underestimated the number of people anyway. Plus our guy that actually prints them is out sick and I can't figure out how to work the printer. So you know, good with numbers, bad with technology. What do you say? So this report, however, is downloadable off our website. And also the presentation will be on our website later as well. And I think Mary also will be posting it on our website. There's also, because the Labor Day report presentation isn't quite long enough to fill our time, some presentations from the Gender Equity Pay Task Force that I am staffing on, of the governors, and also some other things in there as well. So throughout today, I want to explain to you where the data comes from. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. It's a really small group. We can kind of pop up with questions and be very informal here. So Montana's economy has outperformed the U.S. economy throughout the recession. This chart shows the U.S. and the Montana unemployment rates, with the U.S. in red and the Montana in blue, and going back to 1980. And each of these vertical bars are one of the recessions, with the most recent recession shown right here. Now you can see since the 2001 recession, Montana's unemployment rate has been lower than the national rate. We hit a low of 3.2% back in 2006, which is actually a little lower than you'd like. Lots of problems with worker shortages at the time when businesses can't find the right workers for the job. Well, then we shot up to hit a peak of 7% back in 2010, the opposite problem when workers can't find jobs. So now we are back down to 5.3%, which is in August. We don't have any more recent data because the federal shutdown stopped us from producing an unemployment rate last month. But we should be able to tell you what the rate was last month, in like another couple weeks. The unemployment rate for the nation is at 7.2%. The U.S. increased a lot more during the recession than Montana did. Our economy was much more stable. And you can see that the Montana rate is more stable throughout this whole time period. Now, I mentioned back in 2006 we had some worker shortages. And one thing that you kind of start wondering about is how far are we going to come down after this recession before we're in normal unemployment range? Now, normal unemployment is defined differently by nearly every economist, somewhere in between to 4.5% and 5.5%. Some people say 4%, 5%. But basically, a lot of people use this, long-term average rate, which would be right here on the chart, a little under 6%. We're actually below our long-term average unemployment rate right now. But if you just use the last 10 years of unemployment rate average, we're not quite there. So we seem to be kind of in a sweet spot of around the right normal unemployment rate right now. We are likely to continue to decrease our unemployment rate in the next few years, possibly even becoming lower than that, largely because of the large number of people who are retiring as part of the baby boomer population. And they've already heard your population projections, so I'm willing to bet you talked about that a little bit today. So unemployment claims, which are different than the unemployment rate, these are the claims made by unemployed people, have also been declining in the last few years, which gives us an indication that in the short term, for the rest of this year and probably the first part of next year, unemployment is going to continue to decrease as well. So about a third to 40% of unemployed people actually get unemployment insurance. So that's kind of what this is showing you. This red here is unemployment insurance claims. The blue up there is the actual number of unemployed people in Montana. Now, at the worst part of the recession here, about 40% of people who were unemployed received unemployment insurance benefits. And that's largely because there was some expansions of the unemployment insurance program at that time to include some part-time workers, which we are continuing. But now that people are finding more jobs and finding it easier to find jobs, then that number is now decreasing to a more normal level of a third.
Is that all construction, the seasonal ups and downs every year?
It's not all construction, but mostly, yeah. Montana is a pretty highly seasonal economy, and construction is one of the big reasons for that. And in fact, because the construction industry has been so hard hit in the last few years, we've actually seen a change in our seasonal pattern from before the recession to now, which is kind of interesting as a data nerd person because it adjusts all of your formulas to adjust for seasonality. It's because there's more than just one data nerd in this group. I wanted to talk a little bit about where the unemployment rate comes from. Now, nationally, they do a phone survey. It's called the Current Population Survey, and it calls a bunch of households every month, and it asks them basically, are you working, have you worked for pay this week? Well, in Montana, we only have 750 households that are included in that current population survey. That's not enough to provide an accurate statistical monthly unemployment rate. So we have a model that builds in these two other things, which includes the current employment statistics. That's a survey of businesses. A lot of businesses are in that, actually about 3,500 every month. And we also include unemployment insurance claims, although since about a third to a half of the unemployed actually receive benefits, that doesn't actually measure unemployed, but any movement in the number of claims is a good indication of a movement in the unemployment rate. So that way we can track along pretty well. At the end of each year, we go back and we revise the unemployment rate for the entire year, and that includes our statewide numbers, the national numbers, and all of the county numbers that you guys might be using. And we redo those, so sometimes you can see some inaccuracies. Maybe you sent in a grant that said your unemployment rate was at 5.4%, and then you go back the next year and you find it was actually 5.2%. So that's why. It's because we go back and revise everything. And we use a couple of different other data sources to do those revisions. One is the census population counts, and the other is the quarterly census of employment and wages. Which is all businesses are mandatorily required to report their wages and employment to the unemployment insurance program. So if you pay into UI, you're counted in that. Railroad people, for example, are not included in that because they don't pay into the UI system. They have a separate system. So just tried to get a little number. Mary will appreciate this. When we worked in TPR, that was always our favorite joke. Need a number? Here it is.
Bowling scores, we're all about bowling scores.
Bowling scores, yes.
During the peak of the recession, you keep hearing of underemployment and those that just gave up looking for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any means of figuring that out?
Yes. So actually there's 6 different unemployment rates that are published every month nationally, and we publish 6 of them quarterly at the state level. The one that you hear about most is the U4, and that's what we talk about. We call it the press release number, or the main unemployment number. Headline rate, because it makes headlines. There are unemployment rates, it's called the U5 and the U6, that include discouraged workers, who you're talking about. The U5 includes both discouraged workers and those that are marginally attached, which means sometime within the last year you looked for work, but you didn't look for work this past month because you're tired of looking. Discouraged workers are like, I just gave up completely. Even if something dropped in my lap, I maybe wouldn't apply because I know I won't get it. So these definitions are pretty similar, but they put them into 2 different groups. And then the U6 includes part-time due to economic reasons, so which has increased certainly from the recession, which you expect. So the U6 is a lot higher and a lot more, it fluctuates a lot more than the U4, but we don't publish all of them. I actually have a chart that shows all of them at once. And we only talk about the one because they all move together. When the U4 goes up, so does the U5, so does the U6. Now, the U4 and U5, which means the ordinary unemployment rate and the one that includes discouraged workers, are really, really close together. They track, like their correlation is really, really high. The part-time one definitely is more fluctuates. Before a recession occurs, you will see that U6 increase up a lot faster, and then it stays up higher for a longer period of time, and then as we start being fully into recovery, that U6 will drop quite quickly. So that one is a little different, and it does provide us with some additional information, but we use the main one because everybody's comfortable with what that means. There's one rate, and all of them track together anyway. I do get that question a lot. And you read in the media about how the unemployment rate doesn't actually measure these different groups. Mm-hmm. I just read another story just like that this morning. In fact, we do have measures that do include them, but they don't add a lot more additional information. So,
How much lead is there on the part-time increase? And I mean, could you see that coming in 08 or whatever?
Yes, I think that, that was one, it is a leading indicator. There's not a huge amount of leading indicator. Unemployment insurance claims are actually about the same leading indicator as the U6. Partially that's because of it's an autoregressive model, and so autoregressive models use your information from last previous months to track ahead to the current month, and so there is just by the base of the model going to be it lags more than you would think it does. And also there's all sorts of other issues that drive part-time employment, particularly regulation changes. So that's, I have not seen it in the data, particularly not in the Montana data, but the claim for the healthcare reform law is that people are going to be shifting between part-time and full-time employment, or maybe shift from more part-timers up to full-time or full-timers down to part-time, depending on who you talk to. Depends on what that switch is, but it could have an impact. I haven't actually seen any data that suggests that's happening yet, though. So in 2012, Montana had a fairly great, above average year for employment growth, which is really nice because we've had a lot of employment losses in the prior years. And this chart just shows the employment change over the prior year, but it shows three different data sets that we include. The total employed is the includes self-employed numbers. It's what we use to do the unemployment rate, and that's shown in blue. We added over 10,000 jobs last year, including the self-employed. The payroll employment, which is shown in red, we didn't have as many jobs added. That does not include the self-employed. It only includes people who report into unemployment insurance. However, the payroll jobs are a little bit more stable than the total employment is overall. A lot of that has to do with construction, who most of them work as independent contractors. Private employment growth was very strong. You see in 2012 and 2011, the private payroll job growth was higher than the overall job growth. That's because we've had a lot of job losses in the public sector in the last 2 years. Those job losses are continuing in 2013, particularly at the federal level with the sequester. Of course, we had a ton of job losses, of course, in 2009. We are almost up to the point where we can recapture those. In fact, I'm expecting it to happen in either September or October, but we don't have that data yet. So, nothing like the federal shutdown. So 2.3% was our job growth over the last year. That's actually our average job growth for the entire time frame back to 1976 when we started unemployment rate collecting. Our average growth rate is 1%, and this was at 2.3. So it's a very strong job growth last year. We have not hit that level quite in 2013. It's been much slower this year. But this fast job growth last year ranked us as number 3 in the nation for employment growth. North Dakota and what was our other state that beat us? I forget. Florida. Yeah, but that's pretty great. I'm happy with that. And looking forward to 2013, based on the first 6 months of the year, we won't have as strong of job growth as we did the prior year, but this is all preliminary data at this point. Looking at our final data that has come in for the first quarter, we seem to be doing okay. The second quarter, we started to lose we lost a little traction on there. We weren't losing jobs, we were just gaining them as fast as we were the prior year. So I'm not sure how well you can see this one in the back. This chart shows by industry the employment change during recessions and recovery. The recession job change is shown here in blue. You can see construction industry is at the bottom. Over 9,000 jobs lost in the construction industry during the recession. Very, very large job losses. The recovery, which means all from 2010 through 2012, is shown in red. And then the green is showing just the last year in 2012. So construction being this bottom one, you can see we've had huge job losses in construction during the recession. We have had job gains again during the recovery, but almost all of them have occurred within the last year. In 2011, construction basically sat still at the same level. 2012 added a few jobs, but not nearly the number needed to regain our employment in that industry. So I'll run through these. This is trade and transportation, a very large employer in the state. Manufacturing, we have had some good recovery in manufacturing. Very strong manufacturing employment in petroleum and sort of some mining related manufacturing. Our wood products have been the one where most of the jobs were lost. Leisure activities, very strong growth. That's our tourism sectors, also breweries, bars, restaurants. Business services, also very strong growth in that area. Business services include a great number of different things, everything from computer, software programming, to lawyers and accountants, technicians, people who petroleum engineering, things like that. Financial activities is our only industry where we haven't had strong job growth to recover the private job losses during the recession. Mining and utilities is right here. Everybody knows there's some great growth in the Bakken there. And agriculture. Other is basically other services along with information, so not a lot of employment in that one. And then government, during the recession, we had a lot of counter-cyclical jobs added to the economy. Since then, we've had pretty large job losses in the government sector. We're right at about the same employment levels that we were at in 2006.
Barb, is it typical in recession for government to see job growth and then loss during recovery?
Absolutely. For a variety, that's how you want your fiscal policy to work. During a recession, you can have counter-cyclical government spending, which comes in and helps support the economy during a recession to kind of soften that blow a little bit. And it comes through the forms of increased unemployment insurance, for example. The Department of Labor has to hire more people to send out those unemployment insurance checks. And the reason we do that, and unemployment insurance is a great counter-cyclical program example, if someone in your community, one person, let's say 500 people in your community lose their jobs, right? We're up in the northwest Montana, then it's not just them that are impacted by that. It's also the grocery stores, the retail sales workers, the bars, the restaurants. So what unemployment insurance does is come in and provide them a certain level of support so they can still make their mortgage payments and still feed their families, but that actually just supports jobs in the community. So instead of having to lay off everybody at the grocery store, in addition to laying off everyone in the wood manufacturing plant, you just have the one industry impacted. That's the concept. As you exit the recession, some of those will naturally go away. We have fewer unemployment insurance claims. Get rid of all those temporary workers. Other things involved with there is also the stimulus program funding, same sort of concept. It goes away. Also, right here, you're hitting the census, 2010 census employment, which is probably about half of that government hiring. You may have to erase my fingerprints from this.
That's okay, mine are up there too.
Okay, so healthcare and education has been growing throughout the recession, continues to grow this year. It has pretty much been pacing leading job growth, and actually that's great that we've had this during the recession, provides some job opportunities in our state when a lot of the other industries have not, and it continues to grow now. Now a lot of that has to do with Montana's aging population. So, yes.
Why is healthcare and education linked together?
Oh, so that would just include the private education, which is like, the Sylvan Learning Centers. Education is super, super small, so we stick it in with a different industry. And the two have very similar patterns of growth and patterns of seasonality patterns. I mean, for education in the public sector, like local schools and universities, it's highly seasonal because we employ during the school year and there's not as much employment during the summer. But for the private learning centers, there's basically very stable employment, so they just get shoved in together. And it's a NAICS code, a national NAICS code, so but that's the hiring patterns are very similar. So this chart just kind of indicates, like, we've had a lot of job losses, but we've also had very strong job gains in many different industries. But those job gains are actually coming mostly from new businesses in Montana and not necessarily from existing businesses. Now this chart breaks out the businesses that have started in Montana since 2006 and shows how many jobs that they've added since that time frame. So businesses that have been in business, started business in 2007 or later, have added over 70,000 jobs to the Montana economy. This is where our job growth is coming from, is from our new startup businesses. And those new startup businesses have been of every size, including those 50 or larger. Now keep in mind this is Montana businesses. So let's say that we didn't have any, I'll just use Walmart because everybody understands what that is. So let's say we don't have any Walmarts in Montana and a Walmart moves in. That's considered a new Montana business and probably would be in that 50 or larger category. But now that we have Walmarts moving in and they put in a new Walmart, that wouldn't be considered a new business. That would be considered an existing business with job growth. So just so you know, this can also be national businesses that are moving into Montana. But the point of this is that new businesses are really important to our Montana economy, and Montana has actually been ranked nationally quite high for our entrepreneurialism. That's one of our strengths in our economy. Of course, our existing businesses have been losing employment throughout the recession. Now, this does not take out those that actually went out of business, so some of these might be because the business actually failed during the recession. But that employment in existing firms has been going down and hasn't really started to turn around, at least through the second quarter of 2012. Now, this is something that we would expect as businesses are in existence. They learn how to be more productive and more efficient with their production processes. So sometimes that leads them to reduce their labor even though they're increasing their output. So some of this is just productivity increases as well. So now we've been talking about employment. This is actually a chart of personal income, and personal income is very similar to GDP, except that GDP isn't available on a quarterly basis at the state level. It's only available nationally on a quarterly basis. So we use personal income at the state level to kind of be your overall economic indicator. And this chart goes back to 2007 and compares the United States, shown in red, and Montana, shown in blue, of our personal income growth throughout this time period. And I really like this data because it shows a very nice timeline of everything that's happened to our economy over the last few years and helps us understand why job growth has been so slow in appearing. And it took from the recession being over in mid-2009 until 2012 for us to really see strong job growth. So there's a delay of 2 years. Well, a lot happened during that. So the stock market crashed. The recession actually started in the fourth quarter of 2007. Sorry, I lost my place there. But we didn't actually start seeing personal income losses or job losses in Montana until the third quarter of 2008 when the stock market crashed and the financial crisis really hit the stock market pretty badly. And coming out fourth quarter of 2009, we did see some personal income growth. We started to do a lot better, and then the Eurozone debt crisis hit and really slowed down our growth here at home. We do export a lot of goods and services to the Eurozone, and overall just kind of harmed the U.S. economy. So we kind of recovered from that as well. Very strong growth in this quarter of 2011, largely because of some private investments that's done because of tax breaks. But then we had our own debt ceiling debate. And you can see how the uncertainty that's caused with the hitting of the debt ceiling and how we're going to proceed on that really did impact the economy. The next few slides will kind of talk about that a little bit more. And then here in 2012, that's when Montana had our stronger growth for jobs. And then in the first quarter of 2001, we did have a fiscal cliff, which included some payroll tax cuts expiration, some higher income taxes were reinstated as well. So we had both tax increases and spending cuts that hit us in that last quarter, or the first quarter of 2013, which did slow down our economy as well. So a lot of people have a hard time understanding why the sequesters and the fiscal cliff and the threat to the government spending impacts our economy. But the government share of GDP is about 20%, and anything that you cut out of that, any decreases in spending from the government sector actually does lead to a decrease in your current GDP. Now what happens is, when under normal circumstances, we would have, for example, a tax increase, and money would go from the personal consumption and then be spent in government. But that's not the case when we're talking about the deficit. What's happening is they're doing those tax increases, and it's going to pay down our debt, which means the money doesn't come back in. So we're basically just taking dollars out of our current production. So that's why this whole fiscal debate impacts the economy. Now, of course, to tell the other side of the story, yes, those cuts that do impact the economy in terms of current GDP, here's the reason why they're making those cuts anyway. A lot of people don't understand the difference between a debt and a deficit. I'm sure everyone in this room does, but my brother-in-law always likes to say that, our deficit is at 70% of GDP, and I'm like, no, you're talking about the debt. And he doesn't get it, so then I added these charts to my presentation. So, and he's a very smart guy and makes way more money than I do, but apparently does not know this.
Did the chart help?
Huh?
Did the chart help?
I haven't shown him this chart, and in fact, I haven't told him that he is my joke that I made. I think it's better for our family dynamics. I just leave that out.
Did you know this is going on the web?
Damn it. I'll have to do something, distract him. So the green line here shows, by the way, this data comes from the Congressional Budget Office. All of you can download it. The Congressional Budget Office is who tells Congress how much each of their bills costs, does their projections, and it's basically staff for Congress. So the green is your tax line, and it goes back to 1973, and that's how much taxes we've collected. Overall, we're down about 17% of our GDP collected in taxes right now. Right here is when we, that was about 2000 was our peak for that, at about 20% of our GDP collected in taxes. So we're down lower than that now. This red line is our outlays, or our spending, and that certainly increased during the recession. It started as early as 2007 increasing, 2008 increased, and then in 2009 increased a lot because of the stimulus funding. So that's your big your spending line right there, has since come down since 2009 as the counter-cyclical spending gets pulled back. The difference between these two lines is our deficit. So we are spending more than we're saving, that's a deficit. The accumulated deficit that we've had over all of these years is our debt. and our debt is at the highest level that it's been. Our deficit right now was higher in 2009. It is not as high now. So when people say that it's been, you know, our debt is at historic, wait, actually that's wrong. 2009, here I have the next chart. Just had to wait. So this is also a chart from CBO, and it just shows our debt. Our debt is not at historic levels. World War I, it was higher, but obviously it's a lot higher than we're all comfortable with. And it's much higher than it's been since World War I, too. So definitely at higher levels. Now, the big problem is not actually right now. It's what the forecasts say our debt will be in the future if changes are not made. And it shows that here in this projection. And it's just the CBO's projections on if everything in current law stayed the way that it is now, this is what they project our deficit to be. So that's really kind of the big concerns about the deficit, why they're making the spending cuts even though they do harm the economy. One last thing is this is the components of federal spending, and I'm sure this is hard to see in the back. This bottom line, so here, this dotted vertical line is where we're at right now. On this side is the projections, and those sides are on the actual. The blue line on top is basically all, well, I'll start from the bottom. Orange line, net interest, Social Security payments, which are, of course, increasing with our baby boomer population. In the gray line, green line is federal spending on healthcare programs, including the healthcare reform, Medicare, Medicaid, CHIPS, other insurance programs. And then the blue line is basically all other government spending. So a lot falls into that category. So the healthcare and the Social Security are the ones that are driving this budget up, the deficits up. And of course, as we have greater deficits, we also have to have greater interest payments on our debt. So what does that impact on Montana's economy? And I know people hate me when I say this, but in comparison to other states, Montana's poor, old, and rural. Sorry, we are. At least they didn't call us fat and ugly, right? And we do receive a lot of money back from federal funding for every dollar that we pay. Also, you guys probably can't see my joke up here. This is the Office of Management and Budget, which is like the executive president's branch of the budget office, and he's cutting a hole in the ceiling so he can continue his chart up. I love this because I actually have a good friend of mine who works with OMB, and I like to torment her with this chart anymore. When we cut federal funding, that obviously is going to have an impact into Montana's economy. Right now, California, Texas, and New York are paying for a lot of our services that are provided, and it probably, we would have less of those services provided from out-of-staters if we have some federal cuts. Montana's funding back in 2013 was $5.4 billion, and you can get this information and a lot of fancy charts and data that you never want to see again at usaspending.gov. In fact, they changed the way they report this. It used to be run through the Census Bureau, which actually resulted in a lot of consistent reporting. Now it's on usaspending.gov. And you can find out a ton of stuff on there. Like, it lists every subcontractor. So, you know, if, what is the SLK Technologies? And when they get a government grant, you can see what it's for, how much it is, what their address is, all on this usaspending.gov. So a lot of detail in the data, but there is some concerns nationally that it's not being consistently reported across agencies or across states. So there may be some things that aren't consistently reported and not well reported. It's kind of one of the ongoing issues with the website right now. But lots of stuff that you may need to know. And like the U.S. as a whole, our big spending in Montana comes from the Social Security Administration and from healthcare services and Medicare. And the veterans benefits actually fall into third position. A lot of people, I actually talk to reporters quite often that are like, well, Montana just gets ag payments. We do get ag payments, that's in number 5, but we get a lot of other things funded through this federal government as well.
Hey Barb,
Mm-hmm.
to put you on the spot, do you know where transportation lies in that for Montana?
So transportation is the number 1 good and service purchased.
Gotcha.
This is, okay, by, kind of as close as you can get to what is this funding for, this is how it lays out. So transportation ends up being kind of like the goods and services purchase is only about 32 million.
Gotcha.
But it's hard, and that's why there's a problem with the way that they're reporting on this. In order to actually get that information, you'd have to add up all the subcontracts from all the transportation contractors in the
In the
state.
state to get that number.
So this is the data that I understand the best would indicate like what is the funding for.
Right.
Breaking it up by different goods and services versus agencies kind of makes me question about the data a little bit.
Just the other part, I mean, it's about where the check goes too,
Right.
as opposed to where they then spend it.
Right, and that's why one of the reasons why I picked this particular breakdown is because it shows like where the funding comes through, not necessarily who's the end recipient.
To be fair, things like Social Security and Medicare are really transfer payments.
Right.
And so when we hear that Montana gets $1.47 back for $1 sent to Washington, a lot of that just reflects the fact that people work in California because it's terrible, like to retire here.
Right.
And you end up with a lot of that not due to where the federal government's really outlaying as much as the way the transfer payment system works.
Right, and that's, yeah, absolutely. Those are transfer payments, and like I said, it's because we're old.
Yes.
We're not fat and ugly.
We are not fat and ugly.
Well, I'd argue with fat.
Really?
We're getting fat.
But I thought Montana ranked fairly well as a state compared to other states.
If you just compare us to other states, but you
Okay.
compare us to ourselves.
But
Oh, well, don't compare us to ourselves.
Old is good and profitable.
That's
Well,
right.
I keep hearing that. I'm waiting for it.
Talk to you.
Actually, I'm in no rush. So back before my tangent about federal government spending, we were talking about personal income growth. Montana, just like our employment growth, we did pretty well last year. We ranked number 5 in the nation for personal income growth. North Dakota again beat us, which I hate. I hate it when North Dakota beats us. I'm from eastern Montana, so I have even more issues with North Dakota than the average Montanan, but at least we beat Idaho.
With the fact that I think North Dakota makes, what, $800,000 on each well, and we don't? Would that have any impact on that?
I'm not going to comment on that. This chart shows the 2012 wages by sector. And overall, our average wage in the state of Montana is $37,000, almost $38,000. That differs a lot by what sector of the economy you're in. In the private sector, you're right at $36,000. When you work for the federal government, your average wage is much higher. When you work for state government, it's about $42,000, and local government, it's $35,000. Now, a lot of that has to do with what occupations are in there. The private sector, your most common job is a waitress, and followed by a retail sales worker. And that's not the most, I think accountants are the most common occupation in the state, and I forget what they are in the feds, probably something like a program manager. So most of that has to do with occupation. This chart shows how much those wages have changed in the last 5 years, starting with 2008 to 2012.
This is just Montana?
Yeah. And this is in dollar terms what the wage growth has been. So the average Montanan has increased their wage by $3,800 since 2008. Private sector is a little faster than that. We've actually had very strong wage growth in our private sector over the last few years. Increase of over 4,000. Feds, they've gotten again, those dang feds, they got a big bait. Who works for the feds in here?
Raise my hand.
It's all their fault.
You're buying.
All right, so who works for the state in here? Yeah, this is the most depressing statistic in my mind, but maybe not for everyone. Our salary has decreased. This isn't even in real terms. This is in actual terms over the past 4 years. And local governments have gotten a raise as well. I do have that number in the Labor Day report. There's also real terms for all of these. Montana has had real wage growth over the last 4 years, and in fact, we had real wage growth in every single year except 2008. That's not true in the nation, but it is true in Montana.
You said that the state one, that's actual,
That's
not real?
Nominal, not
Oh,
real.
okay.
Sorry, I shouldn't use the term actual, huh? Such a bad
That's what I
economist.
meant.
If that one was not adjusted for inflation. So this does show some real growth here. The red bar is over the past year what our percentage wage growth has been in each category. Green is what our growth has been since 2008 in each category. So you can see here, for example, that the private sector had real wage growth in other years, but the real wage growth really came in the last year in 2012. Very strong wage growth in 2012 for the private sector. And the blue bar is our real wage growth since 2008. And basically there's been real wage growth in every sector, very strong. This is great wage growth of 1.4% per year in the private sector since 2008 during a recession. That's nothing to sneeze at. I already told you it's depressing for us, most of us in this room. But how I mentioned that the private sector has had very strong wage growth above average, this is why. It's almost all in eastern Montana in the Bakken, while the other areas of the state have also had real wage growth, pretty strong everywhere except in the northwest, in Kalispell area. They haven't had barely positive over there. But look here in eastern Montana, just 16% growth. It's crazy. I guess that's what you get when you add about, a couple thousand jobs that are at 100,000 each. So I found this today about statistics. Really, this is just my chance to catch my breath. If you want to share half a job. Okay. Wage growth. We are doing comparative other states very good in our wage growth. We're number 3 in average wage growth over the last year. Number 2 in private sector wage growth. One guess what the state is that beat us.
North Dakota.
Darn it. Damn it. Oops. Not supposed to swear, I suppose.
It's recorded.
It's recorded.
Yeah, great. See, that's why I have wage losses in the last few years. So, the Labor Day report includes a lot of worker demographics as well. And here is a bunch of pie charts on one page. By race, this won't surprise anyone, we're predominantly white. We do have a fair amount of Native Americans as our labor force in Montana. We have about 7% of our labor force are disabled workers. About 11% of them are veterans. This is our age breakdown, although it doesn't include people who are over retirement age or younger than 16, but here's our age breakdown. Okay?
It doesn't look as bad there as what it sounded like earlier.
Oh, I have another chart that'll look worse. Just wait.
Buckle your seatbelt.
We have about 34% of our labor force is at a bachelor's degree or higher. That seems really low. There's another chart later that shows that we're about in the middle of the pack for states. I always see this pie chart and I think, boy, we need more people in getting bachelor's degrees. But a lot of our population has associate's degrees or a few years of college. We have a very low percentage for the percent in just high school graduates, or below high school graduates. We do well in there. And we're about 50-50, a little more men than women in the labor force, which is a pretty standard one. And here's the most accurate pie chart. I'm pretty sure that's pumpkin pie, which that pie I have eaten should be bigger.
Just out of curiosity, where do you get your veterans statistics from?
So that data came from the census, the ACS, American Community Survey of the Census Bureau. And it was, I'm pretty sure that's 2009, oh, I don't have a source line, 2009 to 2011 3-year estimates. And it's hard to get those sometimes. You really have to slice and dice it. I tried to get median incomes for each of those groups as well. It's nearly impossible.
You should come to the training tomorrow.
Oh, I even had your staff work on it for a while. I had you work on it for a while, and it's still impossible. So, although I'm sure the training will be fantastic. Here's our unemployment rates by various demographic. I'm not sure if you can read it from the back, so I'm going to just go through them. Here's our total. Men's unemployment rate is a little higher than the women's unemployment rate. This is a little unusual. The difference right now is higher than it normally is, but that's, construction, manufacturing, job losses during the recession. White unemployment rate much, much lower than that of American Indians. This actually comes from a different data set, but even then, because it comes from a different data set, which is part of the reason. But even when you adjust for that, American Indians have a much higher unemployment rate than the rest of our Montana population. Disabled workers also have a very high unemployment rate. Probably difficult for them to find jobs that can accommodate their disabilities. Veterans. There was a lot of media about how veterans' unemployment rates are higher than the average rate. Not true in Montana. It is true for specific groups of veterans, but those estimates are actually not statistically accurate in Montana anyway.
When you're looking at those numbers, and does your veteran numbers include disabled veterans and veterans together, or are the disabled veterans in your disabled portion?
If they're disabled, they'll be here. If they're veterans, they'll be here. So a disabled veteran would be in both categorizations.
So you'd actually be counting them twice.
Well, these aren't counting how the population breaks out. This counts the unemployment rate in each group. So, our unemployment rate overall is 4.5%, but among Native Americans, it's up at about 24%.
Is there speculation as to why the American Indian unemployment rate so high?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. Mostly because they are based in very rural areas, and well, it's not true right now because of the Bakken, but in rural areas you generally have higher unemployment rates than in urban areas. Although right now it's kind of the opposite is true because of the Bakken. Rural areas are very low unemployment rates. But that's part of it. They also have generally lower educational attainment than the population as a whole. But even after you adjust for those things, there does seem to be, you can't say for sure it's discrimination because it's difficult to say that in every case. But they do, even after adjusting for some of those factors like the rural nature and other issues, then there probably is some discrimination going on there. So this is our unemployment rate by educational attainment here as well. This won't surprise anyone in this room, but the higher your education level is, the lower your unemployment rate is. So, and look, the higher your wages are as well. Isn't that great? Boy. So this chart shows the median wage for Montana. This comes from the Census Bureau data for each category and also broken out by gender. And as you have higher education, your median wage increases. And the red line is for males and the green line is for females. So here's an interesting, this leads us into the gender pay. How am I doing for time, by the way?
25.
25, yeah, you got 20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay, good. So there is a pay gap throughout all of these education categories, right? So the pay gap in percentage terms actually improves the more education you get. This difference percentage-wise is less than this different percentage-wise. However, this is actually a larger gap. So if you look at it in nominal terms, then the gap for the higher education levels is larger than lower education levels. And since I had that chart in there, I thought I'd throw in some charts that I have from the Equal Pay Task Force that we're working on. And this kind of, one of the reasons why women's median salaries are lower than men's median salaries is because women tend to work in a part-time status more often than men. So this chart right here looks at number of weeks worked, these two columns. Here are the number that did not work at all. You have more females than males that did not work. You have more males than females that worked 50 to 52 weeks. So definitely more working. But also in terms of the usual hours worked, these part-time categories are more likely to be female than male. Now, some of this is probably voluntary, but some of them it is probably not. There are a lot of women who would like full-time work who are not. So differentiating that out on a case-to-case basis gets a little bit more complicated, but here are the statistics overall. Now, there is a pay gap in every single state in the nation, and overall the trend seems to be that the higher your average wage is, the less your pay disparity is. So
We beat North Dakota.
yes, love it. In fact, I think we beat all of our surrounding states except South Dakota.
It's not really a good thing, is it?
Well, Montana could be worse, is all it tells us. Montana isn't great when it comes to pay equity overall. Now, this actually it compares only full-time workers here in this one, I believe. But you see some of the states with higher income levels like Minnesota, New York, DC, and California generally have a more equal pay gap. Of course, they have high wages because of high labor demand. They have a lower pay gap because they're more willing to go out there and seek out workers as well. So, rising tide can actually float some boats, I guess. Not sure where I was going with that analogy. So that the pay gap also covers every single age group, and in fact, it really starts to be a large issue in the 35 to 44 category, which is, of course, the normal childbearing age. So this does give us some insight onto why this may start to occur. There's been this book, Lean In, that a lot of people have been talking about. Sheryl Sandberg says that women start voluntarily not taking promotions at the childbearing age because they're expecting to have children in the future. This probably also occurs on the employer side, who stops giving opportunities to women because they expect them to leave the workforce to have children, take care of their children. But you see that persists a lot longer than just childbearing age, and we end up being all the way 65 and older. It goes back to 81% from 75%. So it does start to narrow in the long term, but a lot of that is because older women tend to work more than older men because they need to make up some of that pay gap. Which makes sense, right? The pay gap also persists across every occupational group here. There are ones, some of these that will probably surprise you as being a lower gap percentage-wise, are actually material moving. To me, I'm really surprised by that. To me, material moving is like truck drivers and forklift drivers seems to be a very male-dominated occupation. So it doesn't necessarily matter whether or not it's a female or male-dominated occupation. There is usually a pay gap that persists. And this also shows every single industry. And again, here's one that you wouldn't expect. Construction is one of the industries where the pay gap is smallest. Of course, there's very few women in construction, but it's kind of interesting. Again, it's not necessarily traditional reasoning that makes that pay gap occur. This says federal government, state government, local government, nonprofit, and private. Pay gap exists across all of those different classes of workers. And this chart shows what the pay gap has been for full-time wage and salary workers. So this takes out any issues with the women not working as often or as many hours as men and looks at just the gap for full-time salary workers. There's been improvement over time. We're now at about 83% in 2011. This comes from the BLS. here's the concern that a lot of people have. It looks as though the trend is slowing down. Now, this could just be diminishing returns, but there's a lot of people who say that there needs to be faster progress made on this. And then also, I'm sure this chart's really difficult to see in the back, but this breaks it out by different age groups. That blue line on top is people age 16 to 19 and what their pay gap is. And even 16 to 19-year-olds, they fare the best. Women of that age group fare the best against their male counterparts, but they're above 90%, but not at over 100. At no point does any of these hit over 100. The biggest progress, this is 1979, this is 2011, the biggest progress in terms of closing the gap occurred in the 20 to 24-year-olds, right out of college type females, and large progress made in the 25 to 34-year-olds as well. But you get down to this 35 to 44-year-olds, which are, of course, generally women with small children, and that has not increased nearly as much as the other age groups. So it's kind of an interesting combining the dynamic of where you are, how this has improved over time, and where you are in different stages of your life. So the takeaway points here is the gap has decreased over in time and improving, but it does seem to exist across all of these occupations, industries, classes, age groups, education groups, etc. So one of the things that we're doing, a staff people in the Equal Pay Task Force is kind of doing a research on just the state government workers and looking at the pay gap that exists within state government. And what you do when you do that is you run a regression analysis on gender pay, and this is an example of something that was done in the Academy of Management Perspectives, an article there, and it kind of just gives an example of how you do this regression. You basically say, okay, we know that occupation makes a difference in how much people get paid, industry makes a difference, education experience obviously make a difference. I have no idea why experience is red on this chart. So women actually have higher educational attainment than men, so that actually is over here shown as a negative. It doesn't explain the pay gap, it actually makes the pay gap bigger. But occupation, women tend to work in lower paying occupations than men do, so that explains part of it. Industry plays part of it, and some of the other things, demographics that they use in this particular model is labor force experience, which for them is about 11%, union status and race, but there's still this unexplained portion, and that, you don't say it's discrimination, it could be other variables not included in the model, but that's kind of the unexplained portion is kind of what you think of as possible discrimination. So that's kind of how that breaks out.
Do you look, I have this argument with my husband all the time about why he says there isn't one. And the reason being that if you look at just the two of us, we both work, and then I drop out for 10 years and he keeps going, so his salary goes up. Then I come back into the workforce after a 10-year gap of raising children and start at the bottom again. So does this somehow take that into account?
Yeah, that would be what this labor force experience variable accounts for. Now this model just said, okay, here's the number of years experience you have. I've also seen more sophisticated models that say, okay, not only you dropped out and he has 30 years of working and you only have 15 years of working, but when you start again, you had a 10-year break, and during that 10-year break, you slowly lost skills, and so they kind of change your education and skill variable to decrease that to try, and even regardless of what you do, you basically find a pay gap. Now, some of that, you get a pay gap that might be really small. I mean, there's been studies that say the pay gap is, within 1%. But you still get a pay gap regardless of how many and how you do those calculations.
If you and Joe were to change jobs, would there be a gender gap there?
I'd get paid a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, Joe would really like that.
He would get paid a hell of a lot more. And let's assume that he has about 10 years more experience than he has right now.
Right.
Yeah. So hopefully he'd be paid what you're being paid, not more than what you're being.
Yeah.
Right. Right. I mean, assuming he has more, let's pretend Joe and I have similar experience, which we don't. Then we would assume that Joe and I get paid equally. Anyway, this gap in Montana, according to the ACS, is about 33%. And so we're trying to break that down. Oh, shoot. I didn't mean this to get in there.
Did I say that?
Well, didn't you just show us that women were employed higher than men?
That's right.
Maybe that's why.
I didn't show you anything. It's just funny. So this shows Montana's unemployment rate in different regions of the state. The Northwest certainly had some harder times during the recession than the rest of the state. The Southwest, the Bozeman area, actually had a lot of job losses during the recession too, but very strong job growth coming back from the recession. Actually has a lower rate than the northern and central portion of our state. And of course over in eastern Montana we have pretty low unemployment rates in the Bakken area and has been low throughout the recession.
Is that data available by county?
This data?
Yeah.
Yes. So this also breaks out the employment growth by region. And you can see the Northwest and Southwest, like I mentioned, had very large job losses during the recession. Northwest has not yet recovered that jobs. Southwest is getting close. We had very strong job growth in all areas of the state in 2012, with the South Central, Bozeman area, and Billings area leading the charge, but very, very rapid job growth in eastern Montana. You got to remember there's like half the number of jobs in eastern Montana than there are in the Northwest. So that's about 5%, almost 6% growth, really, really rapid. And in Bozeman area, even though they added a larger number of jobs, that's about like 2.5% growth. So we expect in 2013 to continue to have strong job growth in the Bozeman area and Billings area, slower job growth in pretty much every area of the state. So as we have a larger job growth in the future, one of the concerns that we would be having is issues with our working age population. And this is basically something that Joe's shown you earlier, but maybe in a little different way. So most people, when they talk about the aging population, actually talk about this yellow bar, which is those who are over 65, and it is growing. Okay, yep, we all know that. But what I like to talk about is this group of people who are 15 to 64, who are our traditional working aged people. So in the past, we're right about here in between these two bars. In the past, we have had a nice steady increase in our working age population, which means when we have more jobs, there's another worker to fill that job. Well, in the past, that population is no longer increasing. It's pretty flat for until 2030. So when we have a new job, that worker isn't going to come from population growth. It has to come from with our existing population. We already have an unemployment rate of about 5.4%, so where are these people going to come from? And it turns out that workers are not recyclable. You in there, Mary?
I'm in there. There's me.
So one place that we go to look for people is those that are discouraged workers or underemployed. And so this chart kind of looks at the entire Montana population and says, okay, what's their employment status? And how many of these people do we have out there that we're looking for? So most of Montana's population, well, the largest majority, 48% are employed, and 4% are unemployed and looking for work. 20% of our population are under 16, and while you can have a paper route younger than 16, your child labor laws kind of prevent them from being a good source of labor. Disabled population is about 19%. Now these are disabled individuals who are out of the labor force and not looking for work. There probably is some of them who could be working, although they're currently not working, so that seems to indicate that they may have disabilities that are large enough to not really be able to perform a lot of jobs. So then there's 65 and older. Those are those without disabilities, no overlaps on this chart. 7% of those, we assume that they're getting retired or close to retirement. Taking care of family or work is about 4%. About 4% of our population is in school. 3% falls into this other category, which could be disabled workers. We have no idea where. They don't have any other thing about them that kind of gives us, well, this is probably what's going on in their lives. And then we have a small slice, 1%, who appear to be in early retirement because they're not in the labor force, but they're receiving retirement income checks from, and report that they're receiving retirement checks. So, but basically, of this, my point here is there's only really about 3% of the population that doesn't have other things going on in their lives. And so our number of workers are kind of pretty small. Now we can target those different population groups. This chart shows our labor force participation rate by different demographic. And we can target certain demographic groups in order to get them into the labor force more. Disabled and veterans labor force participation rates are fairly low. The women have a lower participation rate than men. There's things that we can accommodate our workforce, our workplaces to get more workers in, but there's only a limited amount that we can get of workers that we can get out of there. Our population is limited. So what are we going to have to do? Well, one thing that we're going to have to do is increase our productivity rates. What productivity means is that with productivity growth, you can have a smaller amount of labor can produce the same amount of output. Now this is my Econ 101 chart that I'm so proud of. So under a low productivity chart, you put in some capital, you put in some labor, you put in some other inputs, and you put it into this production process, and out you get some output, okay? Well, what we need to do is increase ourselves to a high productivity situation where we need less labor. See how my labor bubble is smaller over here? We need less capital and fewer physical inputs, but yet we still get greater output. Now, this is basically to improve our efficiency, improve our productivity. But if we have fewer workers available, and this is the only way that we're going to continue to increase our GDP without increasing the number of workers available.
I would quibble with that. You really should have your capital thing be bigger, because we're dealing with small businesses, the biggest problem they have with doing productivity increases is that they don't have the capital to invest in what they need to do in order to do it.
Well,
Because it's technical.
it depends on your industry. There's breakouts I could use, but really I'm just talking about labor.
Yeah.
But I'd be happy to look into that.
Yeah.
So one thing, so Montana, how is Montana doing in our labor productivity? And I don't swear, I only have a few charts left. So this chart shows our average wage and our labor productivity measure, and this is basically GDP divided by worker hour. And as you can see, labor productivity, the higher labor productivity is, the higher your wages, right? Montana's over here, fairly low wages compared to other states, and lower labor productivity than other states. So productivity is highly correlated with educational attainment, and Montana actually doesn't do too bad in that. This is educational attainment at the bachelor's degree. We're kind of in the middle of all states. We actually outperform the nation when it comes to high school. We're a little lower in rankings when it comes to PhDs and graduate studies. Here's the labor productivity measure on top of that educational attainment. And as you can see, there's a correlation between the two. The higher your educational level is, the higher your labor productivity is. But here's Montana in the middle. And you, those of you who are familiar with statistics, will see that we're below the line, right? And when you're below the line, that basically means that our labor productivity is a lot lower than expected given our education levels. So there's other things going on with our labor productivity. One of the things that you can do to improve your labor productivity is to improve your use of technology. And Montana actually ranks fairly low on that. Sorry, this did not come out, but Montana is right here in our use of technology. Now this is kind of a crude measure. It's how many workers in our state are involved in IT. So here's Montana in our rankings, and you can see there's a correlation between that and the labor productivity as well. Also, I mean, there's a ton of different ways that you can improve your labor productivity other than that. But that's one of the big ways and kind of one of the driving factors in economic growth in the nation overall. So now we're done. Aren't you excited? As I mentioned, the Labor Day report, which I basically followed with the exception of some deviations about budgeting and gender, is on our website. And also this presentation is also downloadable from that same website, which is lmi.mt.gov. If you have any questions, I won't answer. Just kidding.
Is there any work being done on looking at then why Montana's productivity is unusual, is lower than you would expect?
And I've taken I mean, it's hard to find that out at the state level because they have very bad data on capital and how much capital is available in your state. And in order to really divvy out labor, what productivity is due to labor versus productivity due to capital, you need that measure. But I've been doing a lot of work with it as part of the Governor's Main Street Montana project. And, you know, I've spent, I don't know, a month or so working on it. And there's a lot of other factors that are involved. Rural states are less productive than urban states. There's a lot of issues with the spread of technology. This is my favorite example. It's called technology transfer is the term for it. But what I like to say is we all go down to the Blackfoot and we chat with each other. And I chat with Bruce about what he's doing, and Mary and I chit chat, and we bounce ideas off each other, and that can improve our productivity because we are exchanging ideas and information. So we do that within Helena, and Billings does that within Billings. Missoula does that within Missoula, but there's no way for people in Missoula to talk to people in Billings. And in other states, like Minnesota, for example, you're one city, and that happens with nearly everyone in your state because they're all centrally located in one big city. So that's also part of it. I mean, there's a ton of things that go into productivity, but
Could it have anything to do with the reason everybody wants to live in Montana, that they want to go out and recreate all the time instead of
Yes.
working?
yes. And you know, at one of our Main Street Montana presentations in Billings, we had an architect, and he's like, well, you know, every other week, I drive all the way to Great Falls to meet with a client that I have to meet with in person. I spend 7 hours on a road. I get paid for those 7 hours on the road, but I'm not producing much during those times except, you know, exhaust. So that's also, I mean, that our big rural nature and a lot of spaces to drive between, that's part of it.
Actually, I would add to that, Billings is actually poorly structured for that type of interaction going on, as opposed to Bozeman or Missoula. These are actually locations within those towns where those types of things, interactions happen much more naturally, whereas Billings is much more sprawl, and there isn't a focus.
Well, the incubator closed.
Well, that,
Yeah.
and the university doesn't play a big role in the town. There's nothing where like-minded people really.
It's one of the reasons that I started Matter, because it has encouraged Billings to talk to Missoula, to talk to Bozeman. It's a lot better, but it's still not what Silicon Valley is.
Right.
But I think you're starting to see it now with a number of listservs that have developed. We have a GIS statewide listserv. We have a data listserv now. And I think it is improving. I would say in terms of the martini glass there, the capital is a major constraint in that we have lots of startups, but they're all subsistence or survival startups, most of them. We don't have gazelles. And in order for gazelle, like Right Now Technologies, you need significant capital. But we don't start with the right ideas. We you know, and I think that's one of the biggest constraints for our productivity is that we have lots of startups, but they're around for a couple, 3 years, and then they're gone. So I take a look at venture capital numbers and angel numbers, and it'll give you a good indication of how poorly companies in Montana.
Don't get me wrong,
support.
I'm not saying there isn't a capital availability issue. I'm saying there's a labor shortage issue as well. That's my point.
It's partially that, but I mean, a lot of those people are working more than one job.
Sure.
You know, and that's, I mean, the
4.2%
one
of
number
our
I was actually
population.
wondering about was, yeah, okay, we're growing, but have we gotten up, in terms of actual, per capita income. But if we got into the national average yet,
For per
the
capita.
amount of money that people are making
Oh,
here.
yeah. I mean, yes, you didn't get the full presentation on this one,
Okay,
but
yeah.
in the other one, it's
But, I mean,
obviously not.
that's a big part of it. I mean, a bunch of those startups he's talking about are second or third things that somebody is doing because that's what their passion is.
Right.
But they don't have the time, energy, or capital to take that, furniture building thing or whatever and make it something that there actually is a viable business.
Just one of the beauties for the Department of Commerce,
Yeah.
to help folks do that. And, we get funded to do that by specific program from the legislature. So again, there is money, some available. I would encourage you to check in the Business Resource Division. See, there's my little plug for my boss. And see what we do have, because we do have some of that money for feasibility studies, for startups, for sustainability. But again, it's a function of how it's appropriated from the legislature every 2 years. So,
Yeah, I just posted a link to a page that you've got. It shows all of the funding
yeah.
options in Montana for startups. Businesses, it's really
Yeah.
great. There's a lot out there, it's just hard to find it.
It's hard to find it. Yep, it is hard to find it. We're working on that. So with that, I will, now you know my Barb, I'm the president of her fan club. I think she does an amazing job. Thank you, Barb, so much for coming. We will be posting her presentation. My gift for you
Oh, thank
for
you.
today, for speaking. And come back at 3 and we can talk about the health of Montana. We've heard about the economic state, we'll be talking about the health of Montana.
So, Rob, can you speak to,
Oh, that's the standard.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
That's the standard. You give me that spot.
You wanna go into this?
Oh, great. Let's see, did I think I'm done with that.
one of the things I see do is she started